I was kind of curious about your path. And now obviously today the barriers to entry are not like they were in the 1980s, but you managed to forge a career, and I was just curious how that happened. Where you linked up with the guitar magazines, where you linked up with the music publishers, and were able to do that.
Well, I mean, it was just sort of a serendipity, really, in a lot of ways, because I'd been transcribing stuff for students and for myself for years. And in 1981, I had a hand problem. I had to get surgery on my hand, so I couldn't play on my left hand. So I couldn't play for a little while. And so I looked at it like, well, I can either be like unbelievably depressed, or I can use this time to do something else. And so what I did was I took a course on writing scores, like for Broadway shows, and how to transpose for all instruments and all the rules of standard notation. I had learned to read music when I was a kid, but I didn't, like most rock and blues and popular musicians, reading standard notation was not something that came up ever. It didn't. But it was something that I had learned how to do, and just did it when I was young. And then as a performing musician, it just never came up. You read a chord chart, but I wasn't reading melodies. And anyway, it was very, very helpful to me to learn all the rules of standard notation, and learn about transposing for different instruments, and learn about writing different clefs. And then I got a book that's a famous book called Music Notation by Gardner Reed. I mean, I would read that book like every day, like for a year. I just was picking it up constantly. I wanted to try to memorize everything in the book about the rules of music notation. Transcriptions in guitar magazines was a brand new thing when Guitar for the Practicing Musician came along. And so in 1983, 84, this opportunity came up to do transcriptions for this new magazine. And it was like my friend's older sister met a guy. Like, it was like the most ridiculous thing, like my friend didn't want to do it. The pay was terrible. He's a real good guitar player. But he told me, he said, "Are you interested? They're looking for people to transcribe." And I thought, oh, maybe they'll buy some of my transcriptions that I've done, or I could do something new. Like, I didn't really have a sense of what it was that they wanted. Guitar transcriptions in guitar magazines was not something that existed. So I contacted the guy, said, "Send me a sample of your work." And I sent, I think, like the guitar solo, like a chorus of Hendrix, Red House, something very complicated. And the guy called, he goes, "This is the best transcription I've ever seen in my life," of like something like that, like a rock guitar solo. He said, "I can't hire you because I'm a freelancer myself, but I'm going to tell them that you should be the music editor of Guitar for the Practicing Musician, because you know a lot more about rock guitar playing than I do." And so I just became the music editor of this brand new magazine, and I had to do all these transcriptions, oversee other transcribers, train other transcribers, which ultimately led to me firing almost everyone. And except for Wolf Marshall was the one guy his transcriptions were good, and he was a really good musician. And then the other guys I just trained myself. And but at the same time, one of the very first things Cherry Lane asked me to do was to do a book with Pat Metheny. And so I went up to Boston in 1984 with like 100 pages of transcribed music of the Pat Metheny group. 84. I mean, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like, as time went on, I started doing more transcription books for different companies like Hal Leonard, and doing instructional books, and then VHS tapes, instructional VHS tapes, and then DVDs, and then eventually, like for TrueFire, it's all online, downloadable. So just trying to have those different skill sets, like.
Sure.
I mean, I had to write, so I learned to become a writer. I never studied writing. I never went to school for music. But I played in a lot of bands, and I learned to transcribe and write, standard notation. I had to invent a lot of nomenclature, for the idiosyncrasies of the guitar, feedback, and, tremolo bar, and, wah-wah notation, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I had to learn to create. And much of those things became standardized ways to write these things down for guitar. So
that original submission that you did, was that regular notation, or was there a tablature that you submitted?
You know what? I think it was both.
Both. Okay, so like the magazine.
Yes, for the longest time, everything was notes and tab until notation was abandoned. It was just tab.
I find it hard to read the tab with the stems and flags. Throws me off.
Yeah, because you just see numbers. You're not seeing like a melodic line. If you're used to reading standard notation, yeah, it's weird for people that are used to reading notation. The thing is, though, there's so many people who never learned how to read notation. They can. It's too difficult. So
yeah, that's from my experience teaching guitar lessons. It's always been like a frustrating thing, I guess, in a way, that students will be able to have the technique to play something, but to read it, impossible.
I mean, there's been a few students that have expressed the desire to learn to read standard notation, and I've worked with them on that. I mean, I don't insist that my students learn it, because I don't insist they learn anything. I want them to just play, and enjoy playing music as much as possible. So, but, I think that it's good to create content as much as you can, put it out there. Don't obsess about it too much, because there's always going to be things that you don't like. If it's never good enough, then it'll never come out and no one will ever see it. Sure. You don't want that either.
Right, the good being the enemy of the best.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I'm dealing a little bit with is maybe just playing and like staying healthy, and repetitive stress issues maybe you've encountered, and the way you've kind of dealt with that. That seems to be kind of a constant for me. Is I'm always shaking my wrists,
Right.
Even on stage sometimes. I don't know if you've had any issues like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. I never really get to practice as much as I would like. So, I try to play as relaxed as possible. I'm just going to bring up a backing track for a second and talk about maybe how it's a slow blues, different approaches and things that I might do. How warmed up I am is going to have everything to do with whether that's going to come out well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't just happen. All right, here we go.
Smoking.
So, I mean, I just tried to do different stuff, off the top of my head. And I don't know what it's like for you listening.
Yeah.
But the feeling of the spontaneity is very important to me. So I definitely wanted it to feel that way. And so sometimes just from like the way you play a note and, just move around, just, being aware of the feeling that the music's creating, like whatever it is that you're communicating to the listener,
Right. And well, and what's the connection then with like dealing with playing with pain, perhaps, or
it was just that I wasn't going to try to play like necessarily, super fast or anything like that. I was just trying to play with a musical feeling. So I'm trying to take the physical awareness out of it and be just more aware of music.
Yeah.
So that's in that way, not approaching it like this is some physical feat that I need to accomplish. I'm just trying to make a sound. Like if it's creating a feeling, I want to be aware of what that is and have control over it. You don't want to put the cart before the horse, if you will. The horse is that it has a musical feeling.
Yeah.
So
you kind of mentioned something in passing, which I don't remember any teacher really talking about playing fast. And he made the point that you just did kind of in passing about just being as relaxed as possible. And I feel like that gets overlooked. I mean, unless you're like seeking it out, like, how to play fast. I certainly never had teachers that, kind of routinely emphasize that. Complex thing, because obviously when you're engaging your muscles, they're going to tense in some way. You can press down a certain amount of the string to get the note. And once you've done that, more pressure won't help you. You've already got the note. And finding that balance, that spot of just enough so you're not exerting yourself too much and perhaps causing this extra strain on yourself.
Listen to Wes. Wes Montgomery sounds like the most relaxed human being that ever lived all the time.
It's just so incredibly swinging, like impossibly swinging.
No, Pat Metheny said to me, he said, when I was a kid and I first started to play gigs, all I did was play Wes solos on the gigs because I didn't know anything else. And he said, but then I learned quickly from playing the other players, the older guys, like they didn't dig it, It wasn't it wasn't music. It was just me, like playing something that I'd practiced. Sure. And he goes, so I realized that I had to come up with something on my own. But he said that right away, it was so hard. It was like, how am I ever going to play anything that's going to sound anywhere as good as Wes? And then he went, and this was in 1991. He goes, and that's still true today. He goes, I'll never play anything that's going to sound as good as Wes. Like he still felt that way. Yeah. So what is the guy doing? He's an instrumentalist. And so, he's creating this sound and this feeling all the time. That's so good. It's so great. And so because I had hand problems, I had to very specifically practice how can I play with the least amount of exertion possible and make notes, And so I practiced that way for a long time. And it was really hard to break the habit of just playing like the way that you play.
Yeah.
And so it just changes your whole sort of, John McLaughlin said to me, he said, you shouldn't play with any preconceived notions of like style, and articulation. He said, try to play everything as plainly as possible, like you're just making notes, and you're not adding any sort of idea of what it's supposed to sound like, you know? And he said, if you do that and you record it, then you'll hear yourself, because you're leaving room for your true self to come out. Because anyone, when they play a note, it's everybody sounds different on the same instrument, however they choose to do it, somehow.
Right. There's so much in the fingers.
Yeah, in the touch. So, you know, so that little example I just played for you, I felt like it was musical while I was playing. It seemed like it was good. I was able to tell the story that I wanted to tell. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it was creating the kind of feeling that I wanted to create. So, you know, that's what I would say is, you know, just listen, do that thing of being as relaxed as possible. If you're feeling any stress build up in your hands, either hand at all, stop playing. And wait a second. You know, I used to make an analogy to boxers, because boxers in the ring are spending 85 to 90% of the time conserving energy, because they're back on their feet and they're building up energy, and then they expel all this energy, but then a second later they go back to building up energy again. If you're just expelling energy, you'll run out of energy.
Yeah.
And you, like George Foreman, you know, against Ali, you'll lose. You know, you got punched out. So many blues guitar players play like that, though. Like Albert Collins is a perfect example. To me, he sounds like a guy in the ring. You know, he just hangs out, and then there's a big flurry, and then he hangs out again.
Yeah. I feel like if there's more like current players, somebody like Guthrie Govan, for example, is just constantly just burning up and down the neck. Like
he can.
he can. Yeah, he's just like, you know, energy, you know.
Yeah, he can. But there is a little bit of diminishing return, because Bonamassa plays that way. And I can't listen to Joe Bonamassa at all, even for like 2 seconds.
Not my favorite either. I totally agree.
Well, you also can't play the same guitar solo on every song, because he plays the same solo all the time. And it's because it's just too mechanical and learned.
Yeah.
A guy who kind of suffers from that, who I like a lot more, but he suffers from it as well, is Eric Johnson. And there are people that would say that about Stevie.
Yeah, but I think there's more emotion and expressiveness in Stevie's playing.
Yes, but at the same time, he kind of fall back on certain things.
No doubt.
Whereas the 60s guys, you know, that I grew up with and he grew up with, because we're about the same age, Johnny Winter and Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and Peter Green, Leslie West, they don't play that way, you know. It's a whole other idea. Duane Allman, it's a whole other idea about playing, you know, about finding something to express. It didn't turn into like the hamster wheel thing. Like, you never hear that from any of those guys, like, ever.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of taste too, you know.
Sure.
Whatever happens in any given moment, you know, you can't control all of it, you know. You can control some of it. But so if you change your approach to it, then there might be other benefits that you can reap from it, you know, because you have a different attitude toward it. Like when I played over that track I just played for you, my attitude was, I don't know what I'm going to play. I have no idea. You know, I just want to try to play something that feels good. And so it seemed like it was okay. You have the video. I don't know.
Yeah. I liked it. I mean, it was in your style, and you know,
exactly.
Definitely had you know, virtuosic, you know, flourishes in there.
The two that I have, yes. This is another Scoville thing. Like, we were listening to something. We were listening to a record that you just made, and the, you know, the head went by and everything, and And then the solo section was coming up, and John goes, "Oh, here's where I play my solo." You know, like that his solo is this fixed thing that he had learned that he does in every song.
Oh,
Here's
yeah.
where I play my solo, because to him that's what it sounds like. It's just, oh, I do that, and then I do that, and then I do that. You know, it's all my shit.